Hi everyone, my name is Jillian Chapman and I will be giving the presentation. I just wanted to quickly start off by welcoming Mr. Sonny Perdue, who is the Secretary of Agriculture at the USDA. Thank you so much for joining us and I hope you enjoy the presentation. Today I will be proposing new research in order to find insecticides that will effectively eradicate lanternflies from Pennsylvania vineyards and serve as a solution for the prolonged infestation. So here is a list of the USDA's 7 strategic goals for the 2018 through 2022 time period. I wanted to specifically highlight goals 3, 4, and 5 because I feel that they describe why the lanternfly infestation in Pennsylvania vineyards is a relevant issue that concerns the USDA. And as you can see, these goals involve the promotion of agricultural production, economic development, and privately owned lands through research. And since the lanternfly infestation is directly affecting Pennsylvania vineyards, which are privately owned agricultural pieces of land, it would be in the interest of the USDA to fund research related to this issue since it aligns with their current goals and overall mission as an organization. Just as a quick overview, some of the topics that will be covered today include background information on spotted lanternflies, the problem, which is the infestation's effect on vineyards and Pennsylvania's economy, the plan of action, and the estimated budget for the intended research. Lycorma delicatula, or more commonly known as spotted lanternflies, are an invasive planehopper species native to China. They have piercing mouthparts that enable them to penetrate the base of their host plants, like vines or the branches and trunks of trees, which allows them to suck out and feed on the sap found in the phloem of these plants. So lanternflies develop in 3 stages, the first being the egg stage, which is also the longest stage, and are typically laid between September and November before winter starts. Next is the nymph stage, which involves 4 instars where the insect will slowly grow between early May and late July until they finally develop into adults. And the prevalence of lanternflies is the most abundant in vineyards between August and October, which makes sense because this is the peak grape growing season in Pennsylvania specifically, and grapevines are one of the most popular host plants for lanternflies to feed on. This image shows lanternflies in its different developmental stages. So the right column shows a newly formed egg mass on the top and an older egg mass on the bottom. The middle column shows a nymph in the early stage in the top image, so either the first or second instar, and a later stage nymph in the bottom image, so either a third or fourth instar. And the left column shows what an adult lanternfly looks like with its wings both opened and closed. Lanternflies were first seen in the United States back in 2014 in Berks County, Pennsylvania. There are currently 26 counties that are so highly infested that they are part of the quarantine zone, which is shown by the blue area in the image on the right. Berks County is located in the center of this blue area, which shows how the neighboring counties and even counties from across the state have become infested. Spotted lanternflies are also not confined to Pennsylvania, as there have also been sightings in surrounding states like Connecticut, New Jersey, and Virginia. And as seen in the image, a large portion of Pennsylvania has become infested over the last 6 years, and in fact, over a third of the state is now infested and placed under quarantine as there are 67 total counties in Pennsylvania, which ultimately shows how widespread the infestation is becoming. Here are side-by-side maps from the Integrated Pest Management Program that are about a year and a half apart and provide a better visual of the magnitude of the infestation. So the image on the left is from June of 2019, and at this time there were around 13 counties under quarantine, whereas in the image on the right, which is only from a few weeks ago in late October of 2020, the size of the quarantine zone has doubled as there are now 26 counties involved. And this just demonstrates the fast rate at which the infestation progresses at, indicating that a solution is imperative. This sense of urgency, and of course along with the agricultural and economic devastation being imposed on vineyard owners, is exactly what inspired my intended insecticidal research that will be an essential step towards finding a solution. In response to the infestation, Pennsylvania has mandated businesses and other organizations that transport goods in or out of these zones to obtain a lanternfly permit, while residents are merely encouraged to be observant and report any lanternfly sightings to the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. And although this may seem like a proactive measure towards preventing increases in the infestation, I personally feel like it is more reactive since no further actions towards eradication are being taken. And because of this, I feel that a more aggressive approach is needed to both eliminate these insects and the possibility of a statewide outbreak. The Pennsylvania grape industry is composed of 3 levels that describe the system in which the grapes are grown, delivered, and sold. The quote featured on the screen is from the Pennsylvania Wine Association and just further explains this system. So since vineyards make up the top level or tier, as described in this quote, the entire grape industry is at risk for economic loss if vineyard quality is lacking in any way, showing how crucial the agricultural integrity of these vineyards are. And vineyard owners are also involved in the top tier of the industry and are essential to its success as they are the main producers. So you can expect the quality of the grapes being grown to directly reflect the efforts of the landowners. But with the ongoing lanternfly infestation, they are unfortunately the population experiencing the most hardship since their land and livelihood are being threatened, meaning that grape quality and ultimately the grape industry will continue to suffer without a solution. After discussing why vineyards are so important to the grape industry, let's take a look at the economic impact of the industry overall, as well as vineyards on its own. So the table on the left shows the economic impact of the entire Pennsylvania grape industry and provides a breakdown of the specific contributions for each aspect that compose the 3 tiers of the industry, which were explained in the previous slide. So as you can see, the total impact is roughly $1.4 billion, which is an enormous contribution towards the general state economy. And now looking on the right-hand side, we can see the economic impact of Pennsylvania vineyards alone, which is a total of about $47 million. And this is very impressive, especially for only one aspect of an entire industry. And there is also a fairly substantial rate of employment as seen in these tables that about 10,000 jobs are created annually by this industry as a whole, while over 800 jobs are created by vineyards alone. And these numbers are extremely informative as they show how large the yearly economic contributions of the grape industry, and more specifically vineyards, are to the overall state of Pennsylvania. Now we are going to discuss the problem of the infestation in 2 parts, its effect on vineyards and the Pennsylvania economy. Regarding the effect on vineyards, lanternflies feed on the phloem tissue present in the base of its host plants, so this includes branches, vines, trunks of trees, etc. This causes the wilting, oozing, and progressive death of the host plants, and this is the main cause of vineyard and grape damage in Pennsylvania. But in South Korea, which has been struggling with a lanternfly infestation since 2004, the damage to vineyards and grapes was caused by the presence of sooty mold. This is the result of the accumulation of honeydew, which is excreted by the insects during feeding, and large amounts of sooty mold can prevent the process of photosynthesis, which is how plants create their own food and survive. So the quote featured on the screen discusses examples of how the infestation has negatively affected different Pennsylvania vineyards. So as you can see, one vineyard at the center of the infestation zone reported 90% yield and fruit quality loss, and another vineyard, the vines that were heavily fed upon did not survive winter temperatures, and the ones that did not grow any fruit in the spring. And this shows how vineyards are extremely vulnerable to lanternfly damage, making vineyard owners and grape growers the most affected by the infestation's agricultural and economic impact. Now, regarding the infestation's effect on Pennsylvania's economy, a recent study from January of 2020 was conducted by economists from Pennsylvania State University's College of Agricultural Sciences. They used various forms of data, like government and crop production reports, along with economic evaluating software called InPlan, to calculate the current and potential economic losses from the combination of direct, indirect, and induced impacts of the infestation. And these calculations were made based on three scenarios, which were if the infestation stays in the current counties, spreads to adjacent counties, and becomes a statewide infestation spreading to all 67 counties. And like I mentioned earlier, the infestation has already spread to some of the adjacent counties, now with a third of Pennsylvania being a part of the quarantine zone. This study is very effective at expressing the magnitude of the issue from an economic perspective, which further emphasizes the need for a solution. This table shows the estimated amount of direct economic loss for the three scenarios covered in the previous slide, which were if the infestation is contained in the quarantine zone, if it spreads to adjacent counties, and if it becomes statewide. And these losses were calculated from the current agricultural damage in Pennsylvania, which represents the expected direct impact, and if the maximum damage were to be reached, which represents the worst case direct impact. And just for the crops listed on the left, the total economic losses are extremely high, ranging anywhere from 2 to 14 million depending on the scenario. To highlight how vulnerable grapes and vineyards are to this issue, let's take a look at the percentage of expected total loss from grapes alone, seen at the bottom of the table. So if the infestation remains in the quarantine zone, the total loss expected from grapes is 81%, while if the infestation spreads to the entire state, the total loss from grapes is 72%. And this is a very staggering statistic since it applies to Pennsylvania as a whole. And remember that this table only represents estimations of what lanternfly damage can cost the Pennsylvania economy in the future. But economists from the study estimated that the annual direct economic loss that is currently being imposed on Pennsylvania agriculture is 13.1 million in the quarantine counties, 17.7 million in adjacent counties, and 42.6 million throughout the state. And again, this represents the damage that already exists. So Pennsylvania has already suffered a tremendous amount of economic loss, and this table shows that without a solution, more is inevitable. Regarding lanternfly-related research, there have been more studies and experiments conducted in South Korea than in the United States, simply because the infestation in South Korea began 10 years prior. But for the studies in both countries outlined on the slide, the efficacy of each insecticide was measured based on the mortality rate induced on each lanternfly sample, which makes sense since eradication from highly infested areas like vineyards is the main goal. An important factor amongst these studies is that lanternflies from each developmental stage, so eggs, nymphs, and adults, were all tested on to obtain the most thorough information in terms of the varying effects that the insecticides had on the different stages. And a common result in these studies was that chlorpyrifos was the only insecticide that caused 100% mortality in lanternfly eggs. And another similarity was that the insecticides containing active ingredients of the chemical compounds like organophosphates, carbamates, pyrethroids, and neonicotinoids yielded between 90 and 100% mortality at each developmental stage. And this is vital information for my intended research since I now know what insecticides are the most effective and can easily determine which products would be worth using and investing in. Now we are going to discuss the Pennsylvania State study in greater detail since it acts as a working model for my research. The study divided lanternflies based on what developmental stage they were in. So for eggs, laboratory assays were used as a precaution mainly, just to contain any egg masses that hatched when the insecticide being used was not 100% effective. And observations were made on a weekly basis, since egg masses require a longer period of time to hatch. So 5 insecticides were tested on lanternfly eggs, and only one was 100% effective. And as we know from the previous slide, this insecticide was chlorpyrifos. For nymphs and adults, semi-field and full field assays were used and 36 total insecticides were tested. Observations were made 24 and 48 hours after application, and these results showed that 12 out of the 36 insecticides were 100% effective. And lastly, all of the tested insecticides used on eggs, nymphs, and adults, they all contained an active ingredient of the chemical compounds organophosphates, carbamates, pyrethroids, and neonicotinoids, since they have been shown to cause the highest mortality rates in the research conducted in South Korea. My research will take place in two parts. For part one, the Department of Entomology at Pennsylvania State University Berks campus has kindly granted full access to their laboratories and equipment, since the faculty firmly believes in the need for further research regarding the infestation. Lanternfly egg masses, nymphs, and adults will be chosen from Maple Springs Vineyard in Berks County, Pennsylvania, and this is of course with their consent that has already been given. And this is because they are within close proximity of the campus, only about 30 minutes or so, and more importantly, they have been experiencing an increase in lanternfly activity within the last year. The lanternfly samples will be randomly assigned to receive either the insecticidal or control treatment, and the insecticidal treatment will consist of the 13 insecticides that were 100% effective in the 2018 Pennsylvania State University study that we discussed in the last slide, while the controlled treatment will just be water. And after the samples are given their respective treatments, the resultant mortality rates will be evaluated after 48 hours, either by the percent of unhatched egg masses or the number of terminated nymphs and adults. But after this initial assessment, weekly observations will be made to account for any egg masses that may hatch. For part two of my research, the owners of Maple Springs Vineyard have also granted access of a portion of their land to study the effects of the prospective insecticides on the crop's condition. Since the vineyard occupies 10 acres, 1 acre will be designated for the insecticidal treatment, while another acre will be sprayed with the control, which is going to be water for simplicity. The same insecticides that were used in part 1 will obviously be used in this part as well, and the grape and vine quality will be evaluated before and after the treatments are given for comparison, with daily notes, pictures, and general observations being made for 2 weeks. And 2 weeks may seem like a long time, but this will just make sure that the full extent of the effects are accounted for. And lastly, the efficacy of the insecticides will correspond with the amount of physical damage induced, like the rotting or wilting of the grapes and vines, meaning that less damage is more successful. So here is a picture of Maple Springs Vineyard, which I've already stated is where the lanternfly samples are going to be taken from in part 1 of the research, and the insecticides will be sprayed in part 2. Since the Department of Entomology at Pennsylvania State University is allowing full use of their laboratories and equipment, the only aspect of the research in need of funding is the insecticidal treatment. So on the slide is a table that I created which includes the 13 different insecticides that are going to be used, with the quantity, price per unit, and the total amount for each insecticide displayed. And as you can see, 2 of each insecticide are needed, 1 for each part of the experiment. This will ensure that there's a sufficient supply of each product and will prevent the possibility of running out. And as seen on the very bottom of the slide, the overall total is roughly $4,000. In summary, the grape industry is crucial to Pennsylvania's economy, but is currently experiencing tremendous loss due to the damage associated with the lanternfly infestation in vineyards. Despite these hardships, the return to normalcy is not impossible. The research that I am proposing will be a crucial step towards finding a solution that will ultimately help achieve lanternfly eradication in Pennsylvania vineyards. Again, I want to thank Secretary Perdue for joining us today. I really appreciate your attendance. I would be happy to answer any questions at this time, but if there are also future questions or concerns, I can be reached by phone or through email, which are listed on the slide. Thank you.